and welcome to In the Cool of the Day and today's segment of People Connecting People. I'm your host, Ruth Pegeron. I have a special show for you today. My guest has over 15 years experience in the retirement financial planning industry. He was recognized by Bethesda's magazine's top financial professionals of 2022. He has been featured in AARP, Financial Advisor, and Kiplinger's, among other publications. His focus is on helping clients with tax-efficient retirement planning and investment management. He's a family man with a wonderful growing family and is just a nice person to know. Please welcome the founder and president of Capital Squared Financial, Mr. Alex Seleznev. Thank you so much for being here, Alex.
Oh.
Yep, glad you're here. I'm excited. You are a wonderful family man. So let's start with that. Tell us just a little bit about you.
Well, thank you, Ruth, and
Yes.
I very much appreciate you inviting me. It's really great to be here with you
You're
today.
so welcome.
Yeah, so I'm the founder and president of Capital Squared Financial. As you said, we're a firm that specializes in retirement planning. But a little bit about me personally, actually, something that many people don't know. Perhaps you can hear by my accent, I actually came to the U.S. to play professional tennis.
Oh, wow.
That's how I ended up here. So focusing on financial planning certainly was not my primary objective.
Oh, my goodness. I never would have thought. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of those things I like to, again, share with people when we first talk
Yes.
about this. Yeah, but I've been...
So you hung up the tennis racket and became, or do you still play tennis?
Well, I still play quite a bit, but
Okay,
certainly
okay.
not as much as I used to
Okay.
at this point. And you mentioned, my children have two boys, 3 and 8, and actually that's one of the perhaps better updates on my end. I'm finally able to have them involved, on the tennis court. So we come
wonderful.
out 2-3 times a week now. We practice, so hopefully they're following my footsteps.
I hope
that
so.
way.
So were you very good?
So I used to be 86 in the world in
Okay.
juniors.
Right,
That's how I, got recruited to play at Old Dominion in Norfolk, Virginia. So yeah, again, I still play, but certainly not at the same level.
Same level. All right. Well, when you were in school, did you have finances in your mind too as a career, or just kind of happened?
It's interesting. That's what my mother used to say about me all
really?
the time. I've always been good with math, so it's interesting.
Moms always knows.
And I enjoy working with numbers. Obviously, it's my profession now. But even at the time, I remember when I first enrolled at Old Dominion, economics was my my major. I switched to accounting, and then finally, I found myself in finance.
Oh, wow.
So.
What a great story, and I'm glad your little legacies are going on the tennis court with you. That is the best highlight of the day.
Oh, wow.
At 3 and 8, yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, good. Well, I know you finance is a pretty big, broad, pretty much profession, if you will. So I know that you focus in on the retirement side of that. Why did you choose to focus in on retirement planning out of all of the range that profession?
Yeah, and I really appreciate your question. So I'll give you 2 answers. The first one, this is actually personal to me.
Okay.
So, my perhaps a little bit of a sad story, but my father passed away at the age of 70. So on November 25th of 2020, I remember this day just like it was yesterday.
Yep.
We came out. It was a beautiful day even for November. Played some tennis in the morning. Then I really had to go. I needed to finish a couple of things, work-related actually. Next thing I know, there were 2 police officers knocking on the door. Again, long story short, had a heart attack, and what they told us, all happened instantaneously in 3 seconds or so. So that's where I've done quite a bit of soul searching. You see, and with my father, if you ever met him, he was one of those, athletic people playing tennis all the time. So he was my coach at the time. Now, in terms of his, financial life, I put it that way, is again one of those people who focused entirely on saving money. You can imagine that perhaps that generational too, wearing the same clothing for decades, trying to save every penny, thinking about the future when my mom would start traveling and all of that. And for him, it never happened. Right. So one of the reasons I wanted to specialize in retirement planning is to work with people just just like that to make sure that they actually enjoy their lifetime savings. Now, on the professional side, Ruth, there are a lot of financial planners, investment advisors. Some of them are really good. But when you focus specifically on retirement planning, the tax piece becomes important.
Okay.
Because usually at this stage in someone's life, people already saved, hopefully enough, or perhaps they need to save more. And how tax efficient, let's say, their portfolio distributions become, can have a dramatic impact throughout their retirement life. Again, that's my background, to do tax work, planning work, and of course investment management.
Wow, so it definitely is something that you've come to be personal side and a business side. So you're putting two things together and they really have become your passion of success.
Well, I'll tell you more. It took me a little over 9 months to prepare, to launch my firm, and I wanted to make sure it's done right. And I looked at different models and different scenarios, and again, back to that soul searching. So what is it that you're passionate about, and frankly, what is it that you're good at?
Right.
It needs to be
you need
both.
a little bit of both. Yeah.
So that's where, again, that's how I came up with the idea of, again, launching a firm that focuses specifically on tax-efficient retirement planning.
Wow, thank you. What a good story. Thank you so much. So with retirement planning, you mentioned age. Is it ever too late to start any kind of financial plan?
Well, certainly not. I'm pretty sure you would expect me to say something like that. Now, when it comes to retirement planning or financial planning in general, time is your biggest asset.
Right.
And perhaps you've heard other people say that. So for those who start at least thinking about this in their 20s, 30s, or maybe 40s, chances are it's going to be much easier to achieve their financial retirement goals compared to perhaps people start just thinking about it in their 50s or even 60s. Now, we can help come up with a plan, but in terms of time, that's perhaps the biggest challenge.
The biggest challenge.
I mean, to give you a specific example, I spoke with someone 2 weeks ago at this point. And it's a classic situation. Alex, I'm thinking about retiring in January of 2025. I'm like, okay, well, let's start talking. So after assessing the situation, we realized that it's going to be rather challenging. So we will come up with different options, but we only have 6 months.
Right, because January is right around the
not
corner.
that much you can do. You can tweak things, you can help, but again, there's really not that much time at this point.
Right.
So.
Well, I asked that because I think there are steps to creating a realistic financial plan, and I want to hear what you have to say. What are some steps to creating a realistic plan? And then I'm going to ask you another question and tell you a little story to see what your feedback is on that.
Well,
so go ahead. So what are some steps for creating a realistic plan?
You see, our work here, we try to keep things as simple as possible, for our clients. And I came up with a 3-step system or 3-step process. You assess, you plan, and you implement. So in all 3 steps, they have to be in place.
Right.
So the first step is perhaps the most familiar to most people, to listeners here. You take inventory of what your clients have essentially on the financial side. You certainly talk about their goals and objectives. That is where we spend most of the time actually in our initial meetings, covering the initial questions, and then you transition into the planning side. That is usually the biggest, part of the engagement. Again, exactly how are you going to achieve your goals, right? How much do you need to save to retire at age X?
Right.
When you're working with spouses, as an example, what different strategies can you implement? Tax efficiency becomes key. Again, in terms of my specialty, questions such as, exactly when would you be collecting your Social Security benefits? Should you and your spouse collect them at the same time? Medicare, all of those questions are addressed as part of the planning stage. And then perhaps the most important one is the implementation stage. Because once you have that plan in place, usually 3 to 5 pages long, it can be shorter than that. And yes, sometimes I'm reluctantly admit it, some people simply don't implement it.
Right.
So they have a great plan in place, but it's on paper. You need to implement it. You need to do the steps that you've outlined in the plan.
That you can do. Yeah. Well, you brought up Social Security, and you brought up couples. So do you find that it's better for couples to the middle part, the plan, to be on the same sheet of music, but can you truly be married and have separate retirement plans, especially when it comes to Social Security?
Well, so my answer is yes and no.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a consultant's answer. And the reason I say that is because I do work with a few couples, and it's both, in both cases, this is second marriages, by the way, where, you know, they essentially have two financial plans. They have some joint expenses, but, you know, I work with both, but they're very separate.
Okay.
It does create some, I'm going to say, not so unique challenges because, you know, if you, let's say, file taxes separately, that creates issues. But at the same time, if you file jointly, you have to be married.
Okay, got it.
By the way, in my example here, one of the couples, they're married and they keep their finances separate. And the second couple, they're just live together.
Okay.
So my short answer, it's possible, but it does create certain challenges.
Yes, because that would be my example. I know that in my situation that I've been involved in my family, it was, when are we going to take Social Security? The male wants to take it earlier than the lady and wants him to take his later than he wants to take it. Kind of that, like that scenario you said when someone wants to retire in January 25, like he has it, I want to retire January X or whatever date. And she's like, no, you need to wait a little bit longer because she thinks Social Security will be a little bit more. He thinks it'll be just right because he'll get it longer. So they're in this little debate. So I was curious if that comes up a lot.
Well, it sounds like I just gave you more of a general answer, but to make it just a bit more specific, you know, Social Security planning for married couples, you have to be married, not just living together, is very different compared to how you do it for a single person.
Okay.
Not to go into too much detail, but usually the way we would structure it, we want the younger spouse, yes, in many cases it would be a female spouse, to begin collecting the benefits sooner, if that makes sense for their financial situation, so that, you know, again, the younger spouse is able to potentially inherit the benefit of the older spouse in the future.
Okay.
See, one of the potential mistakes, I don't want to say it's a mistake, but it's usually not the most optimal
you don't know.
choice, is when people collect the benefits at the same time. So let's say at 66 and 66 or 67 and 67. Usually it makes sense to collect them at a different age.
Got it. See, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. So it's time for just a short break. We will return after these messages.
Minds can achieve anything. We make sure they get to college. Federal student aid provides more than $150 billion in grants, loans, and work-study funds to make college possible for anyone with the mind to get there. Because if given the chance, minds will do great things. Federal Student Aid, proud sponsor of the American Mind. Learn more about money for college at studentaid.gov.
Welcome back. You're watching In the Cool of the Day, and today's segment of People Connecting People with my special guest, Alex Seleznev. I got it. Founder and president of Capital Squared Financial. Prior to the break, we were just discussing couples, and now we're coming back from the break. I have a new question for you that I want to ask you. And this is not couple related, I'm just individual related. Just why do most people either wait till late or get intimidated by sometimes? I know that I personally, when I was younger, would get intimidated by financial planning. So tell me, why does this happen?
Well, that's again great question. I can think of at least two reasons. There's probably you know more than that, but the first one is essentially what you mentioned. There is this belief that financial planning is a complex process. And yes, it can be rather complex, you know, behind the scenes, but from the client's perspective, it really doesn't have to be. Like one of the things I like to say, again, I'm biased here, I believe everyone needs to have a financial plan, but a high quality financial plan can really fit on a single sheet of paper. In some cases, that's all you need. Outline your goals and objectives. What is it that you're trying to accomplish, exactly how you're going to accomplish it, and perhaps, again, the most important, how you're going to keep yourself accountable to accomplish those goals. Now, the second one is more of a stigma, I'm going to put it that way. There's this belief that, you know, I don't need to have a plan because I'm not wealthy. Like, you know, I'm actually not a very big fan of the word wealth because it can be,
It varies.
means different things, right? But many people, let's say they own a house, they have a 401k account or accounts if they're married. Let's say there's a life insurance in place, they have college savings accounts for their children. I mean, to me, what I just came up with here on the spot, this situation already requires some kind of plan. Perhaps they're not millionaires, or at least not yet, but they would greatly benefit from more of a structured process, I'll put it that way, to accomplish their financial goals.
Okay, that's a very good answer. What are some tools that people can utilize to make this less stigma with the complexities?
So there's a lot of tools to do that at this point, year 2024, and if you ask me, it feels like every year we have more and more tools to do this. Sometimes I think, is that a good thing or not, or it's just too many options? But I'll just mention a few. So in terms of doing basic calculations, well, if you have access to a 401k plan through your employer, chances are that option is offered to you. And usually it's a basic calculator. Here's your age. Here's how much you have in your account. This is how much you continue to save. This is what it would look like at the age of X, and you come up with that X. Sometimes they let you plug in different variables like Social Security, which is what we were talking about earlier. The other resource, which I find rather helpful, is bankrate.com and nerdwallet.com, I believe. So they publish a lot of different financial planning articles, and they usually target everyday people. So they're not necessarily for professionals like myself. Now, a fair word of warning. It's one thing to use those tools to assess, how well you're prepared, let's say, for your eventual retirement. I'm not sure if many, if not most, for those tools are appropriate for planning purposes.
Right.
I'll give you a specific.
So it's more education.
Again, I'll give you a very specific example, Ruth. So a week ago at this point, so someone reached out to me. They're preparing for retirement. They're one of those do-it-yourself, and that's perfectly fine.
That's good. Yeah.
They showed me their model, and again, without going into too much detail, the tax piece was done entirely incorrectly, and now they're following that plan, which is incorrect.
Right.
So again, I don't want to share too much here, but it's just you have to be very careful when you use those tools. You really need to know what you're doing. Right.
Well, I'm glad you said even the 401k. One of the best advices when I started at my a job in 1992, the administrator lady, when we were signing me up, she says, "Oh, we have a 401k." It was with the company I spent 17 years with Macy's department stores, and she said, "I'm signing you." I said, "Don't sign me up for that. I need all my money." I'm like, I need all my money. And she says, "No, you could do percentages, just a little bit. Just do it. And you can always cancel it." And lo and behold, 17 years later, that was the money I ended up using to take care of my mother when I wasn't working. I was able to lean on that 401k money to take care of myself as I took care of her. So, I didn't miss it. I thought I needed all the money, but I really didn't miss it. And I think, as a young professional at that time, I probably was 20 years old, 22. It was probably the best advice or the best thing someone could have made me do. So I always encourage people when something's like that offered, just do it. Because by the time 17 years later came, I would have never been able to do what I did for my mom without that 401k plan that I had. So so that was a good one. Thank you for that. Should people rely on time-tested ways or try new ways to invest or to save or anything like that? Because you said it best earlier when you said there's so many different things in 2024, but really dollars and cents haven't changed. Honestly, the dollar, it just hasn't changed how to save. So should conventional or traditional ways, or should a lot of these innovative ways be looked at?
Well, it's interesting. It can be addressed as a simple or perhaps more complex question. Again, perhaps a little bit of both. Okay. And here's what I mean by that. Every so often, someone just wants to make sure that they're, moving in the right direction. They don't necessarily care how that happens. They just want to make sure they're moving in the right direction. In that case, back to your question, the more time-tested options are likely your best choices.
Got it.
I mean, I don't necessarily want to mention those options,
Right.
but your
Yeah,
listeners
absolutely.
are probably aware of them. Now, in other situations, again, is when someone says, look, I already have that in place, but I'm actually interested in this.
And something new, right?
In
Yeah.
something new. So how about I will use, let's say, a portion of my portfolio, usually a small one,
Right, and try
3,
something new.
and
Okay.
try something new. I mean, it just, in some sense, it gets you more engaged, right? Again, even though my practice, again, focuses on people who are closer to retirement, but every so often I do work with people who are, younger, out of college, got their first job, and I actually, believe it or not, I encourage them to make mistakes.
Right, yeah.
I encourage them to open an account, make a small contribution into that account, whatever small means in their context, and just, in some sense, play with it.
Yeah.
Because the lessons you learn by, making those mistakes, they can be very valuable in the long
In the
run.
long run,
Again,
absolutely.
I'm a very big proponent for, financial literacy. As a firm, we do a lot of educational events, and that just, again, that's an example of that.
Right. Yeah, I asked too because I can remember when like the Bitcoin came and those kind of things. I was riding around the Beltway and you see the cars, Bitcoin, so it was like a big thing. So that's why I wanted to ask that too. That was kind of new and different for people.
Well,
do
but
that.
there is something to be said, again, not to get into technical details here, but in terms of investment options specifically, well, I guess I will make this more of a blanket statement. You have to be very careful
Yeah.
with those options that all of the sudden became incredibly popular.
Right, right.
Then when you say time tested, it doesn't necessarily have to be, okay, it's been around for 7 decades or anything like that. When something is brand new, this new shiny thing that will solve all of your problems,
Right.
just like with anything else,
Yep.
you have to be careful. And I'm not saying you should just not touch it, right? Kind of comes
But you
back
just
to
should
that.
Yeah, because I know, like with my younger family, I always go to real estate option. I advise those young couples buy a home. That's your, one of the main things you can do to even start your portfolio. Something small.
Great.
And it's time
choice.
tested, and it's forever. So yeah. So I know the average age is a little 50 or so, but how does a 50-year-old begin to start retirement if they're starting at that age?
Yeah, so it's interesting. 50 just happens to be perhaps that average age of when people start thinking about it. In my professional opinion, that is a great time to think about it for 2 reasons. Because usually at that stage in someone's life, there's a certain lifestyle expectation, right? So you can assess it from that perspective. And at the same time, there's also more clarity. And again, the third piece is still have more time to make adjustments to the plan if you need to do that. So back to what I mentioned earlier, you assess, you plan, and you implement.
Right.
And usually, again, when you have 7 to 10 years to do that, you're really in that sweet spot.
Okay. Now this is something that that happened to my aunt, where everything collapsed. God bless her. 2008, everything collapsed, and her plan of action, which she had in place, which was great. She was a retired nurse, 48 years, but she had one retirement fund, I guess, and then everything collapsed, and that collapsed. So what action? What is a plan of action if that was to happen to a person?
So I'm very sorry to hear about that.
Thank
And
you,
unfortunately, I happen to work with actually several people of the top of my head who experienced that. Some of them, luckily, their portfolio fully recovered at this point, but not all. So I understand the pain. So the process, and there are multiple ways of addressing it, and just to make sure, this is not any kind of investment advice. For any of our clients who are thinking about on transition in retirement, we want them to have at least 7 years of their projected cash needs in something liquid and readily available.
Okay.
Something that is not impacted, much
By an investment.
by the stock market fluctuations. Again, that's where the planning piece comes in, because of course you need to know what that would look like on an annual basis for 7 years. Now, usually the follow-up question is, why 7 years? Well, that happens to be this so-called average business cycle in the United States. That's how long on average it takes for the markets to go from the top to the bottom and then back to the top. So if you're able to protect yourself for 7 years.
That you would be.
Chances are you would not be forced to sell your presumably stock portfolio in a down market. Again, I'm simplifying things here.
Yeah, but that makes sense.
But
That
that's
is
one of the primary defense mechanisms we implement for, I'm going to say, if not all, then the vast majority of our clients.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, yeah. Well, thank you for that. So what resources do you provide to the public?
Yeah.
And you can answer that briefly because I have one more for you and we're running out of our time.
No problem. So as I mentioned earlier, financial literacy is one of the focus areas of our firm. We do webinars and seminars at least monthly, or two to three each quarter. So please, for those who are interested, visit our website. We also have a great newsletter specifically for those who are thinking about retirement, transition or in retirement. It's every Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. And we only talk about topics related to retirement.
Right.
So again, we have a lot of subscribers at this point. It's much more popular than I thought it would be.
Right.
But again, if someone is interested, no charge of any kind, please
Just
visit our
education,
website.
Literacy, that's so important.
Well, and what's perhaps even more interesting about it, we focus on case studies.
Oh, okay.
So these are real stories. Of course, we always preserve our clients' privacy, but this is the situation, this was the solution.
Okay.
So these are not your generic
Right,
pieces that you can find
Your
all
what
over
if.
the internet.
Yeah, your what ifs.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's one thing you would recommend that everyone does today?
Everyone needs to have a plan in place.
Just have a plan
I
in
love
place.
to say that it can easily fit on a single sheet of paper, but everyone can greatly benefit from that.
And I think you're so right. Every generation, no matter where you are, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, everyone's living longer. But one piece of paper, I love that. And I think you're right. Everybody could benefit from that. So thank you. Thank you for watching. Well, it's that time again. If you have any questions about today's segment, please see the information scrolling below. You have been watching In the Cool of the Day and today's segment of People Connecting People. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Until next time.